We've just had an incredible guest here on the Warrior Academy podcast. It's Dr. Thoraiya. Today we talk about a very important but difficult conversation. We're talking about child suicide. Why would a child take their own life? What impact does that have on the family, on the siblings? What can we do as parents to spot the signs, the symptoms, or the triggers that could lead a child to take their own life? What can we do to understand depression in young people? And how can we really develop strong, positive mental health in young people from a very young age? A big part of our conversation centers around developing a sense of gratitude and building resilience in young people so that they can go on to live a happy and successful life as adults. It's a very difficult conversation that we're having in this episode, but it's a very important one. It's one that we need to have, and it's one that all parents need to be aware of. So I really encourage all parents to watch this episode so that we can be more aware of how we can mentor our young people through the challenges and transitions that they'll face in a modern life vastly different to the one we grew up in. So, Dr. Thoraiya, welcome to the Warrior Academy podcast.
Thank you.
For anyone who doesn't know who you are, tell me a bit about you. Why do you do what you do?
Wow, why do I do what I do is a bit complex. I think I've always wanted to help people kind of work through difficulties that they've experienced. I've always felt that mental health has been something, especially in this region, that we don't talk about. And I felt like I wanted to contribute to destigmatizing the idea behind mental health and working with individuals and helping them feel a lot healthier, not just physically, but also mentally.
Fantastic. Wow, brilliant. I totally agree with you. I think mental health is stigmatized out here and it's not talked about as often as it should be. Why do you think that is?
Well, I think if you go back to the generations before, right, even medically, when we talk about the whole idea behind mental health, we didn't really know much. I mean, not even, I would say about 70 years ago, we were doing lobotomies, hoping to cure people.
7 years ago?
70 years ago.
I was going to say.
No, thankfully not 7.
Dear me, where was that? Which hospital do I need to avoid?
Right, exactly. So about 70 years ago, plus or minus, I think after COVID, it's hard to remember dates, but about 7 years ago, we were still doing lobotomy. So the field has advanced so much recently, but I think a lot of people are still struggling to understand what mental health actually is, and they're struggling to understand it because there are no tangible tests. Like if you have vitamin D deficiency, you get a blood test, it shows, so you see it, there's proof. But with mental health, it's a little bit different. It's very hard to have that tangible proof, that blood test, that MRI, that CT scan. It's very hard for people to truly understand it.
I think do you know what? We really focus on character development, obviously, and so soft skills are basically hard skills that are difficult to measure. And mental health is kind of similar, right? It's like the opposite of physical health, which is easy to measure.
Exactly.
Mental health is a little bit harder to measure, but it's one of the things that I think we're getting better at measuring, and we're learning just how important it is to actually measure that and then progress with that, right? Within your work in Dubai, who do you typically work with? Who's your typical customer or client?
Myself personally, I work with young adults, so anyone starting about the age of 17, 18 up until about 45, 50. Okay. So that's personally, and I work with couples as well. Before, when I was younger, I used to work with more teenagers and younger children, but I think I'm leaving that to the newer generation psychologists because I think it's good for people to kind of have individuals that are closer in age to connect with them, especially teenagers, because nowadays they're a lot smarter than we ever were when we were younger. So it's good to kind of give them somebody that they can connect to.
Yeah, I can understand that. What do you think are the most typical challenges that you keep bumping into working here in Dubai with that sort of demographic?
Well, I mean, there's a lot of stress, a lot of anxiety, depression, and I would say definitely life difficulties as well as relationship difficulties. In Dubai, you know how it is. It's quite a transient city, so it's quite difficult for people to feel connected to other individuals, so they feel very lonely, very disconnected from their families and their family structures, because we're mostly all expat in Dubai, right? So loneliness is a big thing, and definitely stress and anxiety are secondary to that.
So typical kind of client who comes to you and they're facing exactly that, right? They're lonely, their friends are coming and going. I mean, I see it in schools all the time. They're the kids' best friends, then they leave next year, and they're not just changing their teacher, but they're changing their friends as well. How does an expat deal with that exactly?
Well, it's quite difficult because not only do you take so much time and effort to establish that relationship and that connection to these individuals, but then when they leave, some of them keep in touch, but then some of them don't. But now you have to start that process all over again, even though you're in the same space that you were beforehand. So there's a lot of grief for, you know, dealing with that loss of that individual or those individuals. But at the same time, it's the anxiety that kicks in on, okay, now I have to do this all over again with brand new individuals, and I don't know whether or not they're going to like me or not. So it's quite stressful. I would say the city itself can be stressful in many different ways, especially for younger kids.
If you are if you're an expat living in Dubai and you are realizing just how transient the city is, right? Your friends are coming and going. You've invested heavily into friendships, and then that person's moved on to another country. Not only do you have to deal with the loss of that friendship, but a part of me feels like you might not trust new people again because you're worried they're going to go, right? And it's like, I'm not sure I can either be bothered or cope with someone coming and going again.
Absolutely.
And does that just reinforce that kind of lonely behavior?
Definitely. I think you said it perfectly, in the sense that I don't think I'm in the mood anymore to try again, to put in so much effort, and then the person's going to leave again. And that's really difficult because you do put a lot of effort, especially, I mean, you know how Dubai is. It's very busy, very fast paced. And so just making time to spend it with friends and making time to see people is quite difficult here. You have to actually plan things ahead of time. And so when you do that, and then people tend to leave quite often, it almost puts you in this space where you're just like, I'm done. Yeah.
And it's interesting, isn't it? I mean, I come from the countryside in England where there wasn't an awful lot to do, right? So, you know, what are you going to do? Well, you might as well just meet up with your friends, have dinner with them, that sort of stuff. The options were limited. But here, not only has everyone got such demanding careers or businesses, and typically people are here to try and further their business or career. That's the reality, right? But not only that, the options then to socialize and to go and experience different things are massive. And so I guess there's more distractions here in some way.
Right. There can be. I mean, it depends on how you live your lifestyle in Dubai, to be honest.
What would you say are the top 3 tips you can give to somebody who's lonely?
Oof. I would say join team exercises or activities. It's very easy for us to recluse and become more isolated when we feel lonely, and because we're not really in the mood to do anything. But I think it's good for people to actually take a step out, go join different activities. That's where you'll start to meet people. So that would be my first thing. The second thing would be to reach out for the support system that you already have. Be it family, friends, or even people that you know here, and then actually take that initiative. Be proactive. Nobody's going to come and save you. Nobody's going to be there for you without you asking people and telling people you're not feeling like you're in such a good place.
Brilliant advice. One of the things we spoke about before you sat down was suicide, and it's obviously a massive topic. It's a very, very heavy topic, but not just suicide with adults, suicide with children. Right. Tell me about your work with suicide with kids.
Well, essentially and unfortunately, when it comes to suicide, when we're talking about children, it becomes a lot more complex, because especially around the teenage years, we know that this is the time where kids are most hormonally imbalanced, right? They're hitting puberty, and so their hormones are changing and things like that, and their social circles are becoming a lot more important, so social comparison kicks in, social anxiety kicks in, so there's a lot that happens during this developmental stage. They start to individuate from their parents, and they start to become more interested and more connected to their social circles, if they have a social circle. So this is the time where they are most vulnerable to having suicidal thoughts, and they're most malleable and influenced into thinking about suicide in a far more glorified or beautified manner. So this group is definitely the target group for us when it comes to focusing on suicide and educating parents about suicide.
So there's a glorification of suicide within some communities. That's what you're saying, right?
I would say social media has a big factor to play in that, because online, I mean, it's great in many ways. Social media helps people learn about mental health, but then you'll have a lot of social media that will either glorify, beautify, or even make it so romanticized that people start to become almost like, oh, I want to, have depression. I want to have ADHD. I want to be suicidal. I want to self-harm. It's almost like I'm joining this group. I'm belonging to something bigger. So that's the trend that we're kind of noticing, which is very hard to tackle as an individual outside of that realm, right? When you're not in the online world, it's hard to help people in the offline world, trying to convince them that the online world is not real.
Yeah.
So I would say the complexity of dealing with suicide now is far more than the complexity before when we were working with teens.
I feel like people are more connected than ever before, and yet more lonely.
Mm-hmm.
And it's almost like they're surrounded by more and more people, and everyone's got a microphone, right? And
Right.
everyone's now everyone can be heard, but in that you just got all this noise,
Right.
and so no one's really heard.
Right.
And what people want you, what you see on social media is what people want you to see, and it's like everyone puts this fake profile forward for everyone to see. And you know, one of the things I see in Dubai is so many people buying likes, buying followers, and putting up this ridiculous profile, which anyone who knows what they're doing can kind of see through.
Right.
But it's perception, right? There's this need and want to be seen, to be heard, to be famous,
to be validated.
right?
Yeah.
To be relevant, you know. And I guess the dark side of that is, in some ways, they can really fight for that attention and still feel like they've not got it.
Right.
And when they feel like they've not got it, what do they then do? Well, you probably catch them on the downhill spiral of that, right?
Right. Well, yes, and the problem I think with that is not just that they don't actually know how to handle that, but what ends up happening is that they think that this is the reality, and what they're living is kind of outside of that. So they really start to disconnect from what is real, and they're looking at life in a far more complex manner, which makes it very hard to kind of bring them back to that reality. So yes, we usually do catch them on that downward spiral, but it's not, obviously, I'm not saying that social media is the only reason why this happens, right? There's a lot of things that happen in a person's life that will contribute negatively to them thinking about suicide or trying to attempt suicide. So it's not that social media is the reason why teenagers are doing this, but it's definitely a contributing factor.
Yeah, and probably just sets the scene,
Right?
Like when you say contributing factor, I guess it's adding that huge level of complexity, because we're still trying to understand it ourselves.
Right.
And so here we are, sort of parents, trying to figure out social media in the first place. Meanwhile, our kids have only ever experienced that.
Exactly.
And so they're living in a different world to us. And we probably don't even realize the world they're in. The way in which 90% of their communication is done online is a complete reverse of what we experience. And so it's really hard to help someone when you don't even understand the context in which they're experiencing something, right?
It's quite complex for the older generation to kind of really understand what it's like. I mean, I'm so happy that I grew up in a generation where I could make mistakes and it's not posted online, or people can't bully me when I get home. You know, all of these things I'm very grateful for, but unfortunately the newer generations, they don't have that. So that idea of safe space is very difficult now for a lot of these kids, which makes it harder for them to be able to not just process, but then regulate their emotions.
Yeah. So teaching young people to regulate their emotions is obviously a super key element here, because we can't necessarily stop them experiencing that environment.
Of course.
Right? So all we can do is teach them how to cope within that environment.
Right.
Because that's the future environment they're in. I mean, a lot of the work we do here is helping children with emotional regulation.
Right.
Teaching them to understand their feelings, you know, how to breathe through their feelings and process them properly. And I think that goes an awful long way to stopping some of the most tragic transitions like bullying occur.
Right.
But obviously suicide's the extreme end of this, right? Tell me about some of the examples of people you've helped out of that dark kind of place.
Well, I mean, without going into details, what I can tell you is that essentially a lot of the clients that I've worked with that have either had suicidal thoughts or even attempts, their way of kind of working through that is essentially to find not only a support system externally, but an internal support system. So really tapping into the resources that they have, recognizing what their worth is. And that usually comes from small achievements. A lot of people think that, you know, this idea of like, I need to love myself before I'm able to move forward in life. We don't have to go that theoretical so quickly. We can start with the small things. And small things include small achievements. So what are the things that you can do now? What are the things, and the baby things, for a lot of people who have suicidal thoughts, they can't even get out of bed, or some of them don't want to get out of bed. So the fact that they get out of bed, I celebrate with them and I show them, this is a big achievement for you. Like, this is something normally you wouldn't do. And so by recognizing all of these little wins, we're kind of boosting self-esteem, self-confidence, self-worth, self-value, which is helping people kind of get out of that. But also, it gets a bit tricky with individuals who don't have that proper family support system at home, because anything that I'm going to do with my client in therapy is going to be very like destructed once they get home with the family structure if the family isn't involved.
Yeah.
So it's important that my client or any individual has a proper support network, be it with family or with friends.
I love what you said about the kind of collection, the massing of small wins, right? And one of the ways I see it is, you know, when you look back, it's all the little things adding up that you said you were going to do and you did, and you know that gives you reliability and trust in what you say you're going to do is going to happen, and that's what gives you confidence. It's almost like a confidence hack, right? Like if you were going to say, what's the easiest way to build confidence? It's just do the thing that you said you were going to do.
Absolutely.
Even if it's tiny. Like if you say you're going to get up at 6 a.m., just get up at 6 a.m. and you'll look back at that day and be like, you know, I did it.
Yeah.
And it doesn't matter how small it is. I think it's the compounding of that which then creates these big things that you experience in life. And the other thing you said about the support network at home is so key.
Right.
You know, we can have incredible instructors here and a world-class program and give them everything, all the methodology they need, the online resources, everything. But if parents aren't leaning in and taking the resources and implementing them at home, it's a lot harder to do. When I look at the 3 C's, so we've got the 3 C's: confidence, conduct, concentration.
Okay.
And we did a survey to about 2,000 parents to see the impact our program was making. And we measured their soft skills, their confidence, conduct, concentration at the beginning of the year, at 3 months, 6 months, 12 months, and so on. And we saw an 82% increase in confidence,
wow.
right? 49% increase in concentration, and 11% increase in conduct. And people say, why do you advertise? Because it's such a big difference, right? 11% and 82%. And I say, because I want parents to realize that their child can come to a class once or twice a week and gradually build their confidence. They can come to a class and do all our, you know, the meditation and sequencing and all the stuff we do to build their concentration. But conduct, behavior, is one of those things that as a parent, you need to be so consistent with all the time at home. And so it shows to me that 11% of our parents are actually taking that home. 10% of our parents, whatever, are taking it home and actually making those changes, right? So it's a really interesting conversation point for me.
Right.
That if you don't lean in and actually take the lessons back and, you know, listen to the advice and implement it at home, you leave half the potential development on the table.
Of course, and I think most parents are scared of the topic of suicide, and rightfully so. It's not really something that you'd want to talk to your children about, nor would you ever want your child to experience. But the reality is that suicide is there. And if you're talking to your child about suicide or any kind of mental health difficulty, you're not encouraging them. This was like the old mindset, you know, before is like, don't talk to people about drugs, don't talk to them about alcohol. Or people will have ideas, they'll get ideas on what to do. But with suicide, what you're doing is you're not encouraging it. You're basically talking about all of the variables that can contribute to a person having an increase in those feelings of, you know, of suicide. So when parents open that space for a child, when they start to have that communication, when they start to model the fact that, look, I'm not okay all the time. Sometimes I'm feeling sad. Sometimes I'm feeling anxious. Sometimes, you know, I need to do some breathing because I'm feeling super angry right now. So when you're modeling that behavior and you're creating that safe space for your child, you give them an opportunity to open up to you about things that normally they wouldn't, especially within the teenage years.
Yeah, I totally agree with that. I think it's gone are the days where you need to be this superhero parent who never shows any weakness, and no one ever, you know, your kids can never see you upset or whatever. I think that by doing that, you create this false sense of what life is like, right? I do think there's a period in a child's life, maybe up until like 6 years old, 7 years old, where they don't need to see everything you go through. You know, they need to see you as this safe, secure, constant, you know, supportive network at home, which isn't, there's no cracks in it at the beginning. And then later on, I think when they get to that kind of 10, 12-year-old stage, it's actually really important for you to say, I'm going through something difficult, I'm stressed today, and this is how I cope with it. This is how I deal with it.
Exactly.
Because by doing that, they model your behavior and they learn how to do it themselves. But it's interesting. I think, you know, the other day I was stressed and I was with my kids and I was like, you know, I wasn't in a good mood, had loads of work on, didn't sleep much the night before, and I was irritable and all this sort of stuff, as a parent would, right? And, you know, I probably was short of my kids. I didn't quite respond to them in the way that I know is the best way as a parent. And rather than just ignoring it and moving on, anytime you're like that or you make a mistake as a parent is actually a brilliant opportunity for you to correct it and show them that, look, you made a mistake, you can apologize and you can move on, and this is the way you should do it, right? So, I think it's really important for parents not to feel guilt or shame, but also to do the work, right?
Yes.
Like, don't just breeze over things.
Right.
The hardest thing for me to do in that situation was going back to my kids and saying sorry, and then saying this is how I should have done it.
That's actually amazing that you said that, because a lot of the clients that I work with are young adults.
Right.
And a lot of them will constantly tell me, I am so scared of messing up my kids because of what my parents did to me. And I tell them that time and time again, my clients, I hear the same phrase that comes out of their mouth where they say, I just wish my parents said they were sorry.
Right.
I just wish that my parents took accountability, that they said I messed up, rather than owning this kind of attitude of, I'm the parent, I know best, I know everything, you don't know anything. So it's kind of invalidating, minimizing the child. And so what I realized is, by hearing all this story, and now I'm almost like 20 years into this job. Oh my God, I need to change. So I'm almost 20 years in, and I hear that same statement over and over and over again. I wish my parents took accountability. I just wish my parents said they were sorry, because if they did, then I wouldn't have felt like I was crazy. I wouldn't have felt like I was the wrong one. I was the bad one. I was the one that needed fixing. And that is so powerful. So what you just said now is amazing. Just by apologizing, saying, look, listen, my bad. It wasn't a great thing that I did. People make mistakes. We're human. We're not always in a good space. And, I wish I had done this instead. Okay. I'm going to work on, doing better next time. Just that, the power of modeling that behavior is.
Do you know what? I guarantee if your kids are growing up and wishing that, you had said sorry, that you're probably feeling sorry for, that you should have said it as well. I see a lot like leadership. We've got close to 100 staff at the Warrior Academy, and I feel like apologizing is a really key part of leadership. If I do something wrong, I mess up, whatever it is, and it can happen, then saying to the team, look, this is where I made a mistake. Sorry about that, guys. Let's move forward with this.
Right.
I think that's good leadership. I think that's removing ego for the benefit of the team. And so when you look at the family perspective, it's like, if parents could just remove their ego and just put their kids first and not their perception of what it is to be a parent, God, I think they would just benefit their kids so much in the long run.
It would put me out of work, which would be great.
Okay,
to
so
be
don't
honest.
do
no,
that.
Do that. Please do that, so that the future generations of psychologists are no longer needed.
Well, there'll be other problems then, won't there?
But maybe, actually, maybe.
It was interesting. I was doing a video the other day, a podcast the other day, and it was like, we talk so much about trying to develop kids' confidence, but what happens when they're overconfident, because we've done so much work?
True.
Right? And now we've got narcissistic kids who are overconfident, and it's like human beings have problems regardless.
I think so.
I think you'll be busy whatever happens.
Right.
Just you might have to pivot what you do slightly.
Yeah.
So talking about the kind of family unit as they go through something as devastating as suicide on that topic. I know that you've worked with families where children have taken their own lives.
Right.
What's the impact then for the siblings of those children? Because I know in the Warrior Academy we, as I mentioned to you before, we partner with a children's hospice. So we mentor the children of their siblings who are terminally ill. So these kids are going to die. The family know it, and they work with them for several years. Sometimes it's a miracle and they survive, but very unlikely because they're in a hospice.
Yeah.
And the whole family unit is there to support this sick child. And so what often happens is the sibling gets left out. The parents don't notice they're going through bullying. They don't notice they're going through difficult transitions at school, at home, adolescence, girlfriends, boyfriends, hormones, whatever it is, right? And then they have to deal with the passing of their sibling, as well as watching their parents stressed and sad every single day. And so what we try and do is provide that support. So from a level of mentoring the sibling through a very difficult transition like that, I understand, but not through suicide.
Right.
Because that adds a completely different element. It's probably out of the blue, and a lot of the times the family aren't expecting that, right?
Of course.
So tell me about your work with that, and what's the impact, the fallout there when that happens?
I think it really depends on the family and how they handle that situation, and it also depends on the ages of the siblings. So the younger they are, actually the younger they are, the easier it is, just because they don't really understand what's happening. But when they are, anywhere between the ages of 6 to 18, and plus, the parents will usually go through a breakdown themselves, which is completely understandable. I think the worst thing that you can go through in life is losing a child, and I think just that in and of itself makes it very difficult, without judgment or blame, very difficult to be there for the other kids. And so that neglect that child feels, it's not neglect from the parent, but it's neglect that the child is feeling, that sense of abandonment, that sense of like rejection that they're feeling, and basically isolates that child themselves. And then sometimes, depending on the age of the child, they might feel more responsible to take up the role of the child that passed. Or, for instance, they might feel a sense of responsibility to now take care of the other siblings while the parents are grieving. There are so many different ways that the siblings actually handle this type of a situation, but they're not usually good ones. So essentially what we try to do is we say, okay, as you're grieving, you have to be careful and you have to always watch out for the children here as well. And so sometimes we try to have family interventions instead of just focusing on one versus the other, because it'll just separate the family a little bit more.
So it's bringing everyone together.
Right.
And then making sure everyone understands
how everybody's
feeling and how everyone knits into this.
Absolutely.
Do you think a parent can ever recover from that?
From the suicide of a child, I think it's extremely difficult. I think just the loss of a child itself is something that a parent cannot recover from, and I think the suicide makes it much harder because of the guilt, but also because of the stigma that comes with suicide and the way that people usually treat you afterwards, like, what did you do? Were you a good enough parent? Were you, neglecting? So I think it's very hard to come back from something like that, but the reality is that, if we teach people more and more, we educate people about suicide, if we educate parents about talking to their kids about suicide, then there's a higher chance for us to actually prevent any type of suicidal actions or attempts or even thoughts in a lot of children.
Yeah. So it's awareness, it's peeling back that layer of mysticism,
right,
and making it just something that people understand.
Right.
And it's interesting what you said about people don't want to talk about it because they feel like they might be encouraging it in some way if they do. And I guess in some ways, in terms of a lot of conditions out there, that is the case, right? If you over focus on one aspect, if I think about having a cold, I probably end up with a cold, right? And I suppose that's a physical link between the psychosomatic response maybe, but I think that for a lot of people, they can have a negative view on life, and it can kind of compound over time and create huge issues for them.
The problem is that when a person has an already negative view on life, they'll probably already get to that place without your help. You might think that you're just speeding it up, but in reality, right? But what you're actually doing is preventing that person from moving forward with that thought process. Because essentially, even though there are a lot of, let's say, contributing factors to the idea of suicide, like, for instance, depression or negative thinking, black and white thinking, and so on and so forth. But we have other things that are quite strong in their correlation, like bipolarity in children or schizophrenia in children. These things must be noticed and must be recognized and talked about so that we can prevent the possibility of suicide. But also, especially in the teenage years, the hormonal imbalances that happen there, the affected physiology that occurs, is so grand that we can't just pretend that they're not going to experience lows. Yeah. Out of most of the teenagers that I've ever worked with in the 20 years that I've been doing this, I don't think I have met, maybe just to kind of, I don't have the exact number, but I would probably say somewhere between 70 to 85% of those students have always said, I've had a suicidal thought or I've tried.
Really?
Yes.
Wow.
Because in those years, it's very natural for that to happen. They may not actually mean it, but it's one of those things, oh, I wish I would die, or I'm just going to kill myself.
Yeah.
Those words are just said.
Feelings that they're
exactly,
and they don't know how to channel that.
Exactly, and if I'm not helping them learn how to deal with that, if I'm not helping them remove those statements from their vocabulary, then they just start to use those statements over and over again. And as you said, if I just keep thinking that I'm going to get a cold, eventually I'm going to get a cold. It's the same idea. So if I keep thinking I want to kill myself, I want to kill myself, I want to kill myself, that's where I'm going to head towards. How interesting.
That just by not talking about it, the internal dialogue continues regardless.
Right.
It's like that we're always being coached by someone, right? It's just most likely the voice in our heads, which
Exactly.
could be ours or it could be someone else's that's been implanted in there, and we need to do the introspective work to remove it, right? But
Right.
how interesting that it's that internal subconscious dialogue that goes on, that by actually talking about it with them, you have the ability to interrupt that,
Right.
to break that cycle, and to then reframe things into a more positive way. Fascinating.
And not just positive. I mean, at the same time, we're not trying to go from black to white, right? It's not like either doom and gloom or like everything's flowers and rainbows, because that's not what life is either. But it's about looking at it from a more balanced perspective, looking at it from, bad things are going to happen. And this is these are other ways that we can handle it. These are other ways that we can think about it. These are other perspectives we can have. So what you're giving them are coping skills. You're teaching them strategies to help regulate their emotions and help them figure out how to deal with life in the way that it is.
Depression's on the rise, right? It's increasing. Suicide, therefore, is on the rise. It's increasing. Do you think that there's a link between our lack of gratitude in society and the increase of depression?
Absolutely.
Do you think that's because life's got easier?
I think it's because of a few things. I would definitely say social media is making it very difficult to appreciate what you have, because we're now what we call upward comparing.
Comparison.
Yes, so we're socially comparing with others, but we're doing an upward comparison. So I look at people that have more than me.
Aspirational.
Exactly, and instead of aspiring, I'm more jealous.
Right.
And now I'm looking down on my life. So the tendency for us is not to downward compare. So we don't look at people who don't have as much, and then we become grateful.
Is just find lots of people that you're not impressed with at all, and only follow people you're not impressed with.
Right. Or look at the balance. I mean, look at the things that you are grateful for. For us, just waking up in the morning is a gift. Just, having friends, a gift. Having parents that are alive, a gift. Having food on our table, a gift. So all of these things, and I know a lot of people take that for granted. They're like, okay, that's not such a big deal. No, but it is, because there are people that don't have that. Yeah. So when we remind ourselves that, yes, there are people that have more than we do, and there are people that have less than we do. Yeah. When we remind ourselves of that balance, we can see what we can be grateful for.
I think gratitude is such a vital aspect of our lives that we need to really enforce into what we do. It's interesting because when I started the Bates Foundation charity 2 years ago now, the goal there was to help impact as many lives as possible, right? And to go into these slum areas, homeless shelters, orphanages, and try and help these young people and make an impact in their lives. And so what was really profound for me was the impact that actually had on my own life. It was like, wow, I started looking at things differently. I'd be walking through slums and orphanages, and there'd be kids in there who had just been saved because they've been on, found at railways or whatever, and no parents, substance abuse, all this sort of stuff. And they'd be the same age as my kids. And I'd come home and I'd be like,
right,
there are my kids. I'm putting them to bed in a safe bed and all this sort of stuff. And I think that profound sense of injustice, and also the kind of yin and yang of that, life is so unfair, the world's so unfair, comes with, God, I'm grateful.
Right.
And I think that a lot of parents experience that with the recent, devastating situation in Gaza, right? Which no doubt has been a really difficult time for so many families here in Dubai. Mums, dads. I see a lot of mums struggling with watching what's going on and then having to look after their own kids.
Of course.
Have you spoken to many parents about that?
Absolutely. I mean, also the Palestinian community here is quite big. So a lot of people are not only experiencing that sense of, survivor's guilt and the collective guilt of being safe in an environment where other people are dying, but parents are finding it very difficult to watch these videos, to see what's happening, and they're feeling very helpless. Yeah. So many people have been feeling very helpless and very exhausted. They were going through this empathic distress where there's just so much that we're watching. And at the same time, there is, as you said, that yin and yang to it, which is that gratitude side. But sometimes with something as big as this and as horrendous as this, it's really hard to remember that gratitude or to hold on to that. Maybe not remember, but to hold on to it when you're seeing so much. Yeah,
that kind of yin and yang. Yeah. One pulls from the other, right? And it's like how can you think about how lucky you are when your whole mind is just consumed by how unlucky everyone else is, and how much injustice there is in the world. Thinking proactively, what can parents do to instill a sense of gratitude in kids, because ultimately I really feel like gratitude is like a core resilience builder. If you can, and it's something no one really experiences or expects, right? Like if I train my child to be confident and strong, they're less likely to be bullied, and they'll be more resilient. But actually, you talk about yin and yang on the kind of internal side of this. If I teach my child to have this deep sense of gratitude, they're going to be more resilient.
Absolutely.
To their own negative thoughts, to the way they perceive life,
towards others.
They'll be more empathetic, and even towards devastating topics like depression and suicide. So what would you say is the kind of top 3 things that you can encourage parents to do to install that sense of gratitude in young people and their kids?
First one would be modeling, definitely. So it's important for you to be able to recognize what you're grateful for as well, and voice that out. Second one would be to integrate it into your daily life. Sometimes I tell parents, make sure you ask your kids before you go to bed at night, what's one thing they were grateful for that day? And it could be from school, it could be from home, it could be just in life or about their studies, it doesn't matter, but just have them tap into that on a daily basis. So those would be the first 2. And the third one would definitely be just to kind of create an environment at home where they can see things that go far deeper than the superficial that we're so used to now. So a lot of us are looking at, the phones that we have, the cars, the houses, the things that, where we go out, what we buy, but try to go deeper with your children. Try to show them what is actually really important in life versus what you have,
I love that. I think if you want to build gratitude in your kids, they're going to obviously model behavior, but it's a case of they're going to put more weight on the values that you literally show them more weight on, right? It's like if you as a parent want your children to be grateful yourself.
Exactly.
And your kids will end up being more grateful. I also think a physical representation of gratitude is quite powerful. So what we encourage parents to do is have a glass jar at home, right? We call it the gratitude jar. And we did this with my daughter when she was younger for a whole year. And every morning we would write down, the 3 of us there, now there's 4. There's soon going to be 5.
Congratulations. Oh, wow, congratulations.
No one knows.
Well, now everybody knows.
It's still later now. Whoops. So write down one thing they're great with, tear a piece of paper off, scrunch it up, stick it in the jar, and over time this would grow, right? And so they would physically see the gratitude increasing. And initially they come up with little ideas like, I'm grateful for food, or I'm grateful for my bed or my friends, and then it would be not having to walk all the way to school, or being able to go to school, or I like this about this person. It started to become really
specific.
Because they had to, because they were having to think creatively. And I think it's that change from the obvious to the less obvious, where they actually have to think about what they're doing, which is amazing. And at the end of the year, we empty it all out. We start reading these things
that's so beautiful.
We didn't know what the other person had written.
Right.
So you could tell by the handwriting, right? And you read this, wow. And it was interesting to read my wife's stuff, and she'd read mine, and it'd be like, wow, that's amazing. And even some of the things were kind of sad to read because it was grateful for people, and then a year later they're not there. And it's like, wow, life is impermanent. And I think one of the bittersweet things about life, which forces us to be grateful as we grow, is the impermanence of life.
Right.
It's like you've got to be grateful for it because it's not there for long. And I look at having kids and I'm like, well, there's only so many times I can actually take them to school.
Right.
There's only so many times they want to hold my hand or go on my shoulders or whatever it is. And so you should be grateful for those little moments, I think.
And the younger generation has this statement which is like YOLO, or you only live once. And I tell and whenever someone says that to me, I'm like, that's actually inaccurate. You live daily. You only die once.
Yeah.
I mean, depending on your religion, obviously, and what you believe in, but essentially, you only die once. So you live daily. So if you're going to go with this mindset of YOLO, you only live once, just do whatever you want without thinking of the consequences on yourself or anybody else, then you're missing out on the point of what that is supposed to mean, which is carpe diem, which is far more, I think mindful, which is live. The idea is to live, to enjoy the life that you have, appreciate the life that you have, not just exist and kind of be here.
Yeah, definitely. I think one of the best ways to pass these things on to kids is storytelling. And we tell a story every class around the whole of the Warrior Academy. Every week we tell a different story, and it's 52 lessons in character development, courage or resilience or whatever it is. But it's interesting. So with my kids, I start telling stories about the work that we're doing in the Warrior Academy in these developing countries. And
Right.
but I don't make it kind of tragic. I make it very inspirational. And actually the work that we are doing is with incredible, resilient individuals who are, they're thriving in the situation that they're in, regardless of their upbringing. They are in this incredible situation where they are so creative, so resourceful, so resilient. And so I talk a lot about that. And my daughter, she's almost 7 now. She sees pictures of me teaching out there in Africa and India or whatever, and she's like, "Where are where is that? It's a school. Well, where are the chairs and the tables?" I'm like, this school doesn't have any tables or chairs." Why not? They didn't have any money to buy tables and chairs. Well, we should send them some. We should solve that problem. I'm like, yeah, you can grow up and solve that problem if you want.
Right.
I'm quite happy there's no tables there. It means we can all train martial arts easily.
Right.
But it's funny how their minds think around it, right? Like they perceive that as an injustice immediately at a young age. They're like, well, I don't want to have tables and chairs if they don't, because it doesn't seem fair.
Right.
And it's funny how that changes as people grow up. But I think if you tell stories to kids, just that level of gratitude just becomes a part of them, becomes the norm, right? It's a powerful concept.
Right.
So let's finish with some practical advice for parents in terms of being aware of these things before they get to a serious stage, right? We've talked a lot about gratitude. We've talked about the worst case. What are the kind of practical things that you would say parents can do to spot things before they start going downhill?
So, yeah, that's a good question, because when we're talking about identifying suicidal markers before a person decides that, okay, this is the step that I'm going to take to end my life, usually what they do is they tend to start to get rid of their things. They start to give them away. They start to write things down. They start to allocate different things to different people. They start to talk to you in a way of, when I'm gone, or, I'm not going to be around much longer. So they'll really indicate to you that they're not going to be here for much longer. Sometimes, and depending on the child, they might get more excited. So you might see a sudden change in their mood, that they're really happy. And that for them is because they finally found a solution to the pain that they've been experiencing for such a long time. Other children will isolate, will recluse, will separate themselves even more, thinking that anyways, you don't really care, so I'm just gonna move away until I decide to do this. So it really depends on your child. You have to be very careful, very observant. Just make sure that you keep the communication open, and don't always talk to your kids about mental health, because that gets boring very quickly. So instead, try to talk to them about everything. Talk to them about life, talk to them about their dreams, talk to them about their friends. Don't judge their friends. That's a big one, because if you judge their friends, they're gonna feel very uncomfortable to talk to you again.
Yeah.
So
that's so true.
yeah, and
great way to put off your child for speaking to you.
Exactly. They actually call it, what do they call it? A Botox brow. So just just keep it, just poker face. Just do not have any kind of reaction whatsoever.
The best ways I've found to actually have because a lot of parents don't really know how to talk to their kids. Like, you can picture, right? They come home from school. What did you learn at school today? This classic conversation. And one of the best pieces of advice I had, I'm not sure if it was from another dad or a mum, but they said to me, meet your kids where they're at. So your kids don't want to talk about school. Like, if you want to find out about that, that's fine. But go in with something that they really enjoy. Like, if they are really into Lego or Harry Potter or whatever video game they're in, do you know what I mean? It's like, talk about that. And then once they're interested, then you can start talking about the other things you want to.
Right.
But you've got to meet them where they're at. I think that's a big barrier to communication parents have. And once you've got a barrier to communication, you then can't see the symptoms of more serious things later on down the line.
For sure. And usually if there is a major disconnect between the child and the parents will feel it. They'll see it if they're observing.
Yeah.
And so building that bridge in communication between parents and children makes it a lot less likely that a child feels like they need to take their life.
Yeah. Dr. Thoraiya, amazing chat.
Thank you so much.
Thank you so much for having me. Thank you so much for having you.
Yes. Thank you for having me.
Thanks for having us. Let's start again. I really hope you enjoyed today's Warrior Academy podcast episode. We're going to keep creating these episodes because I know that so many parents find them useful or get insights or get ideas about how to develop their child's character. But it all comes down to the 3 C's: confidence, conduct, and concentration. So if you want to get a deep insight into the levels of confidence your child has, the level of concentration they have, or the level of conduct they have, so that you can actually put a score next to it and then work towards increasing those scores like we do in the Warrior Academy, then I'd love to invite you to fill in the breakthrough area assessment. It takes about 5 minutes of your time and you will get a personalized PDF report on your child's 3 C's. To access the breakthrough area assessment and find out your child's 3 C's score, all you need to do is go to www.breakthrougharea.com.